Ooh. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Tuesday without Toomey. And we are here with a representative who actually does wish to talk to us. He is Pennsylvania State Representative Steve McCarter, and it's shocking. Here he is directly communicating with constituents. Like, I know it's shocking, and this is something Senator Toomey could do if he was so inclined. Um, he does not know what our questions are going to be, but he is going to endeavor to answer them, and that's magical. And he is not going to cut us off because he doesn't like our questions. So we're feeling really good about that.
Or have us arrested.
And he's not going to have us arrested. So we're really excited about like this sort of constituent state representative interaction. And we're hoping that Senator Toomey takes a look at this and models this for himself, and possibly listens to some of the content as well, which would be even better. So, State Senator Steve McCarter is
State rep.
Oh my gosh, did I say state senator? Oh, it's because I'm so used to trying to deal with a senator. State Representative Steve McCarter is highly interested in issues that are centered around gun violence, public education, healthcare, and today, as we're approaching Earth Day, we're going to specifically talk about the environment as well. Of course, everything is in the miasma of COVID-19, so we know that this will also be a topic of today's conversation. So from there, I'm going to pass it on to Steve. Take it away, Steve.
Well, thank you very much, and I really do appreciate the chance to talk today, because as we approach Earth Day, and again, one of my major elements of my time in Harrisburg has been spent really on environmental issues. So Earth Day was to be a very important day for this year, but as we know, because of COVID, things have changed. And as we approach the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, nothing could be more important, except obviously what we're going through at the present moment. And I think the two are related in many ways, and they're very good examples in a sense of how we as a species are going to be reacting to issues that have monumental impact, and at the same time, how we deal with those issues are going to determine whether, in fact, we are ultimately successful in adapting to the changes that climate change is going to bring upon us. And that's one of the focuses, obviously, of the evolution really of Earth Day, from the first one back in 1970. And again, I think it's important, for me, and I remember the first Earth Day. Did not participate to the degree that I wish I had, but I think there was something called the military a little bit that was influencing what my schedule would be on certain days, and still in school and trying to finish that up with ROTC. But knowing back at that time when it was developed here in the United States, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was Dennis Hayes, I think was the individual who created the first Earth Day. And Dennis took on the national job of trying to organize it across the United States instead of just doing it up at Harvard, where he was going to school at the time. And nobody could have seen the fact that, literally hundreds of thousands of people, 10% of the US population, 20 million people, participated in that first Earth Day. So it was a monumental event. And as we look to this 50th anniversary, surprise, surprise, that individual is still involved in terms of trying to promote what we should be doing in terms of looking at our planet and how we deal with that. And I know the plans as they were being developed over the last 2 years for this 50th anniversary, the goal was to get out over 1 billion people on the streets and across the planet. From the United States to China to every single country would have participated. And it's kind of interesting to see, because you've seen the reaction over the past year, little over a year now, of what Greta Thunberg has been able to generate in terms of interest in the environment and climate change. And so all of those factors coming together, really, only 3 months ago, we were thinking of how this would be a very, very special week, very, very special week coming up here to celebrate Earth Day and, globally. But unfortunately, it's now going to be more virtual, as we all know. And it's going to be something I think, again, an awful lot of people are going to participate in, but at the same time in a different way. But as I said, climate change, Earth Day, there are very, very interesting similarities with what we're going through with COVID and how people react. Important. How science is so important really in our society and should be across the planet. I was saying a few minutes ago and thinking about this, that Barbara Kingsolver, in one of her great books, Prodigal Summer, I think was the name of the book, had a great quote in there in which she talked about how science doesn't tell us what to do; it only tells us what is. Mm. Well, all you have to do is look at the facts, and whether it's COVID-19 in terms of what the caseload is and what all the statistics are that we have that tell us how impactful it can be and how devastating it can be. Well, the same is true when we look at climate change and we look at the nature of how climate change can lead us to, a devastation that's going to take place with rising ocean levels, whether it's the melting of the glaciers, whether it's, increased rainfall, all of the things that science can tell us statistically. But how do we react to that? Does that mean that we prepare and along our shorelines, which are going to be devastated over the next 50 to 70 years now, where we see a 4-meter rise in terms of ocean levels? Or does it mean that we ignore it, much like we did initially here with the pandemic? And do we just put our heads in the sand and wait till it hits us until we realize the water's over our head? How do we react to these things? How do we plan for the long term? We're not very good at that, it seems like, as a species, to be able to plan long term and to be able to look into the future and say, this is what we need to do to solve this problem that's coming down the pike. But hopefully that'll change. Maybe this pandemic will be the wake-up call for all of us to understand what's going to happen. So let me stop there, let you take your questions, because I can ramble on for a long time.
One thing that, that comes to mind is that environmental issues, as I understand it, used to be far more bipartisan. In fact, the Environmental Protection Agency was established by Richard Nixon. And I know that, environmental protection is in the Pennsylvania Constitution itself.
It is, without a doubt. Clean air, clean water are guaranteed under our Constitution. And Representative Curry, who was a Republican in the House of Representatives in Harrisburg, was the author of that constitutional amendment in Pennsylvania. And so, there is a great bipartisan history that has taken place. And it's tragic that over the past 25 years or so, we've seen a change that somehow climate change and environmental issues have become less bipartisan and more, can we say, a part of the great divide between the parties that exist at the present moment. And that's a tragedy, because there should be total unity in the fact of what's happening with our environment.
I have a question about moving forward after the epidemic. We've all seen various pictures and videos of very clear skies in big cities and animals in places they're never seen and clear water in the Venice canals and so forth. And we're all saying, well, see, because we're not going out and we're not flying and we're not using our cars, and this is what happens. And what do we do to sustain that when we are allowed to use our cars and go on planes? And how do we get people to want to change that behavior?
It's a really, really good question. And, a lot of it sometimes is, unfortunately, it's going to be, the answer to that, I think, is going to be driven by economics. As we well know, we live in a time when we have the greatest wealth divide we've ever had, with, only the top couple of percent basically able to enjoy much of the economic freedom of the world that so many can't have, whether in developing countries or even in our own country. The wealth differentiation creates a real problem. So that for the people who live in that 90 whatever, 98 to 95, 90% of the people who can't afford to do many of the things that the top 2% surely can do, it makes it very difficult. And so when we look at the future of where we are with energy alone, in terms of how that energy, once we get past this, whatever I like to say, how many months it's going to last or how many years, but until we come up with a vaccine, as we all know, there is no immunity to this particular virus, and we don't know, again, how recurring it's going to be, what the immunity levels are. So many unknowns. But what we do know is that energy in many forms here in Pennsylvania, we well know, we are blessed and cursed. We are blessed with a tremendous amount of fossil fuels available, and we're cursed with the knowledge that to use them is painful and is hurting our environment to a degree that, again, is unsustainable. So the problem with that, of course, is that the availability of those fossil fuels as we move forward is still going to be there. And where we were trying to make progress, and I think we were actually making some pretty good progress, both here in Pennsylvania and across the country and around the world, I think as people became more aware of obviously the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere and the other greenhouse gases, including methane from natural gas, we were making progress in convincing people that we had to come up with plans to deal with that. I'm a little hesitant to believe that as much as we can see the clean air and, see the cleaner water in Venice and so on, and, there's tigers resting on the streets and, down and outside of Johannesburg. All that looks good and surely could be what our future was, but people have to eat. People have to have housing. And it's going to be a tough transition right now to understand how we bring everybody back and try to move forward in those areas that need the help the most in the developing countries to be able not to use the fossil fuels to the level that will be available. There are going to be a lot of countries out there selling cheap gas and natural, all of the fossil fuels that are available for use. So that's going to be one of our big tricks, is to be able to find ways to try to balance that out again, so we can move to our alternative energies and cleaner energy sources.
What can we do within Pennsylvania to try and counteract a lot of the loosening of EPA regulations that it seems like this administration is enacting right now, under the guise of we need, for some reason, even though we have this pandemic happening, it seems better to have less clean water and air, which seems to be the administration's stance?
Well, there's no way to sugarcoat it. The bottom line is you got to elect people into office that are of like minds and that honestly see the future a little bit more than what your bottom line is for the next few months, next few years. You've got to look longer term. And if you don't have those people in place, it's going to be very hard to change the people who are, don't believe, that just can't see this. They can't see that COVID-19 spreads across borders, that you just can't open up one part of a state and expect the other parts of the state not to be impacted by that action. That's a difficulty. And that goes back to my premise that, we as a species have a hard time looking longer term. And so as we look at these problems, again, that's the same thing I try to explain to people, that the COVID problem is we call it a pandemic, which means it's worldwide. And the solutions have to be worldwide as well, because you just can't deal with them at a local level. You have to understand that it keeps spreading, and it will continue to spread until we get a vaccine to be able to give us some immunity to this particular virus. And, again, even that becomes the issue. Who gets that vaccine first? Who produces it? Who markets it? How is it able to be, and who is able to get a hold of it first to get immunity to it? Those are big, big questions that we still don't know answers to in this crisis. And that makes it even more difficult. Well, and much the same, again, make the analogy back to climate change. We know that there's going to be worldwide problems that are coming from that. We see it in extreme weather already. We see it in drought. We see it in all different kinds of things, but it's, it hits one place differently than it hits another. The only one that will be fairly uniform will be the rise in sea level, even though it will be faster in certain places than others. But when that starts to happen and we have to move literally hundreds of millions of people away from the coastline, where they go to, how we take care of that, who are the most vulnerable, whose property gets taken care of first. Is it the wealthy who own those palatial places along shorelines in many parts of the planet? Or is it going to be the people who are the service industry that we now know is so important to us? All the clerks that live in those communities that service the grocery stores, or in the case of the people that wait on us in restaurants, or the people who are the ones transporting the food, all of those elements. This, as I say, is a great wake-up call to see, how important all of us are in the interactions to take place of everything. It's not just how much money you have, it's what you're doing to help society.
Yeah.
I remember a couple years ago, I remember seeing a documentary at the Highway Theater that you had sponsored about how climate change is really a national security issue. And that had not occurred to me before I saw that, but it made so much sense that it drives so many of the instabilities that then become part of national security challenges.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And again, I know that Dr. Titley from Penn State, who was one of the focuses of that particular film and participated with us in talking about that, he's so correct. And I mean, the military honestly gets this issue. They understand. I can't say everybody does, surely in the military, but the vast bulk of the military understands what the implications are when you're starting to talk about, well, let's take a simple one. The staging area for almost all of the military activity in the Indian Ocean is Diego Garcia. Largest part of it is. And Diego Garcia is an island. It has, I believe, the highest point on that island is about 8 feet above sea level. It's not going to be there for much longer. And they know that. And they still use it, obviously, and they're trying to keep it for as long as possible. But that island is going to be underwater, by the end of this century. And consequently, you have to shift. Or you go to Newport News, and you realize Newport News, which is the largest of the Navy's facilities along the East Coast, their docks are already being inundated by, a foot level of increased sea level in those particular areas, caused by two things: ocean level rise and by subsidence of the land in that area. They know they've got to rebuild the whole entire facility. They have flooding down there in Newport News and the areas down there practically once a month of one form or another because of tidal elements. And so military gets it. They understand this, but it's getting the people in the elected office, I think, that are the ones that have to be there to help out and solve those problems.
Yeah, I think we've been talking a lot about getting the right people into elected office. I think at the same time, we're also in a position where we can't get anyone new into elected office for like the next, I guess, 6 months, 5 months till November. And, and also we've been dealing a lot with, so I guess some we do a lot of, even though you're correct, absolutely, that if you don't have the right people, as we know from our interactions with many of our representatives, including the namesake of our current group, that if we don't get people who listen to us into office, no matter how much we call them, they tend not to listen to us. So is there any like points that you feel that even people who may not be aligned with us might be a good, like you mentioned the military, and I know, is there any pressure points that we may have at this point as we work towards November?
Well, I think they are. I think the analogy is those of us, especially in dealing with climate, and again, as one of the co-founders of the Climate Caucus up in Harrisburg, of which we do have 70 members, both senators and representatives. Sure, we don't have a majority yet in either of the two chambers, but it's making sure that everybody is familiar enough with the issues, that they feel comfortable in talking about the issues, that they feel that these issues are a guiding light for us right now with the COVID situation to be able to point to that future. So when we talk about, the impact of science and looking at data, The data has to be the thing that drives us for what we do. Those are things that eventually will come to pass. And I knock on wood every time I say this. I hope it doesn't get worse before it gets better. You know, that we do go down a path that it actually leads us back to where we have some semblance of normality. But the science tells us that may not be the case. And so we have to guard against that, and getting people to understand that, that every step that we take forward, we have to also look at what the negatives may be as a result of taking those steps. So that if something untoward happens, something bad doesn't, you know, that we can't foresee yet, or that even the modeling shows us may happen, and it does happen, then we can at least say, look, the science is right, and we keep going back to the science for what the answers are, because that's the same as we have to face with the climate issues as well. And so for every individual we all try to deal with, we have to keep referring back to the science, I think is critically important. And I'll add to that, I'll add one point. You know, and again, it's a good point, because Earth Day was going to be one of those great things that I think would bring us all together. It's scientists around the world. It's not just in one location. It's not the United States, or it's not just in, you know, in France or whatever the case may be. It's everybody everywhere. And the solution to the problem of COVID is much like the same solution to when we look for climate change. It's going to take everybody. It can't just be a few. Everybody has to participate. The scientists have to come up with a means to do it, but as individuals and as, you know, as lawmakers, wherever we are and whatever party we are, we all have to take into consideration those things that science is telling us, so that we can effectively move forward and try to combat these things.
I am practicing being quiet so I can allow. So,
Question. So since we have to.
I was going to add one other thing to that I didn't mention earlier, because we are coming up in 2021.
Right.
And so in the next
To be together.
couple of years, we're talking about the alternative energy portfolio standards in Pennsylvania. And we want to be in a position that we can increase those portfolio standards. So, you know, there are various different steps along the process to make sure that we end up moving forward on those areas and not falling behind again. You know, we've been on track in a sense to accomplish the original goal. It was passed back in 2004, back in legislation in Harrisburg. They called for us to have, I think it was 21%, I'm trying to remember now, 21% or 18%, I guess it was 18% of all of our energy use by the year 2021 would be in alternative energy forms, wind, solar, and so on. And we're on track to make that. We're at about 15.2%. And the goals that I've seen through the advisory committee, we will make that. And we'll even make it by the goals in a sense that we've established out that are not part of the alternative energy portfolio standards, but goals set by the governor through 2025 and through going back to the Paris Accords, the national or international accords. We will make those goals by 2025, but we're doing that largely because we've moved away from coal and we've moved to natural gas. And so the CO2 levels and so forth are better using natural gas. But methane is also there, and that creates another issue that comes from the natural gas products. But getting those standards changed, and again, we had set up, before this all happened, we were moving toward 30 by 30, 30% standard by 2030 would have been accomplished. I think we would have been able to get that done, hopefully in the legislature, along with moving us toward the regional greenhouse gas initiative, is working with the other states of the Middle Atlantic area and New England on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or by the U.S. Climate Alliance, which also Governor Wolf signed us on to last spring after you know, a lot of pressure from the Climate Caucus members and so on, that we were able to get him to move forward on those issues of both the Climate Alliance and working with other states around the country, and with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. we haven't been as successful in obviously getting as much done as we'd want, but those are the steps that we're moving forward. And again, once we get past this initial problem here of what we have to deal with, then we can start getting back to those goals and moving forward again.
Thank you. Rosalind and Margaret here are both your actual constituents. So I want to yield the opportunity if they have any other questions.
Okay. So I would just like to ask, since we're not going to be able to celebrate Earth Day collectively, what might be 2 or 3 things that people could do at home or, in their community while staying physically distant from each other?
Well, I think, some of the lessons that we're doing for, I think, Earth Day, are really, really good things. Obviously, you pointed out a few already. I think that, we've seen that by conserving, we can clean up the waters very quickly in places like Venice, in the canals, or by, flying in a different format, if you will, in terms of what's happening with the amount of fuel that's being used. We can clean up the skies. I think that there's elements here that, that are being pointed out by the fact that we're socially distancing and not traveling and not doing some of those things. What are the possibilities? Now, again, I think for Earth Day, it's to remember those things. It's to remember the importance of that. It's to remember how we get to the point that air and water, like were passed back in the 1972 amendment to the Constitution in Pennsylvania, were critically important. It's reminding our courts that they have to uphold those particular elements also, that they're fundamental now, just like the Second Amendment to some people. We have something called, environmental protections. So, those elements are critically important on a broad level. On the personal level, enjoy the chance, in a sense, to look at our environment and how critically important it is. Read about it more, study it. The fact that life is very, very precious, and we're losing our biodiversity. We are impacting that horribly every single day. We lose hundreds of species, ones that we don't even know exist because we've never had a chance to catalog them. And we're obviously still going through, and this is one of the ironies, I'll give you a great irony, what we can do. There's a bill coming up in the legislature, I think this week, that deals with eliminating an unused provision of it deals with trees and planting of trees in Pennsylvania. It hasn't been dealt with in, decades probably. And so they're using this bill as an example for Earth Day of, we don't need this anymore. Well, the reality is we are losing our forests at a greater level than we have at any time in history. That it's not just here, but it is in Pennsylvania. It's all over the globe. And we have to, call it out to the point of simply saying, we need to preserve trees. Why in our local communities do we have to cut down every darn tree when you want to build up a house? Build the house around where the trees are. I think we've all seen examples of that, even in widening of roads and so on. And we're going through that in Cheltenham as an example, where we take down trees in an arboretum. Maybe there's another way, maybe we need to look in a different way to preserve what's already there and not lose, some of the trees that we already have.
Yeah. Okay, great. We are all practicing new skills today.
Yes.
So I think that was just, if there's anything you want to say in conclusion beyond trees are great, which I agree with, and I really think we should keep trees. Like, I didn't know we were having a war against trees. I like trees.
Well, there's a great book out there called Overstory right now too. I think that you may want to take a look at if you haven't read that book. It's
okay.
from a tree's perspective of looking at what role they play in our world, and the fact of some of the science that we haven't looked at so much in terms of trees, but trees tell us a great lot, and they do work together.
Yeah.
They communicate, and they find ways to take on challenges that we have no idea.
Wow.
As a society, maybe we can learn a lot from the trees that are closest to us before we cut them down.
Yes. And if you could tell us the author of the book as well, and then send it to us, and we'll make sure to put it in the
Powers, I believe. I'm trying to remember. David Powers.
David Powers. Okay. Well, we'll grab it and make sure that people can have a link to that book, so that if they would like to learn more about how trees are awesome and we would like to keep them, seems like a minimum, then that would be great.
Let's say that some trees are more communicative than your senator that you happen to be working
I
with.
feel like every tree is more communicative than our senator.
And if we were unkind, we would say they might contribute more as well.
I don't think that's unkind.
No, very accurate.
I mean, the tree gives me joy.
And
Also oxygen.
And oxygen. It also helps the bees.
Yeah, and many other animals as well.
So in short, yes, we should elect senators that are even better than a tree. In 2022, we're going to work really hard.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
There's something else I was going to say. All of you enjoy your Sunday as best you can.
Mm-hmm. And it will be Tuesday when this is aired. So everybody, we recorded this in advance.
Very good,
So,
Dan.
thank you again for taking the time
Thank you.
to talk with
So
us.
happy to.
Appreciate it.
Anytime.
Thank you. We will
Okay.
send you everything you need to know. We'll send you all the links to everything. So you can.
All right.
Okay. I'm just
Very
ending
good.
the recording now, but please don't leave, because I have one more thing I want to ask you when we are not recording, and it is technical. So goodbye, everybody. All right. Ending recording.